At the end of January 2023, the fifth Forum of Free Peoples of Pos-Russia was held at the European Parliament in Brussels. Many activists of national and regional movements from Russia took part in this forum. Activists and international experts discussed both ways of a peaceful exit from the crisis that will happen after the collapse of the so-called Russian Federation. Recently, more and more world experts and politicians have come to the conclusion that Russia is collapsing. It is an inevitable process, and it was initiated by Putin when he ordered his army to attack Ukraine. The forum was organized with the main support of the Alliance of European Conservatives and Reformists. The forum was opened by Polish MEP, Anna Fotyga.
Good morning. It's a very misty and grey Brussels morning, yet I'm happy to open this conference. I'm Anna Fotyga, Polish member of the European Parliament, and together with my colleagues Kosma Złotowski, Robert of Poland, Robert Zile of Latvia, and Alexander Sasha Vondra of Czechia. We have the pleasure to welcome you to this conference hosted by the ECR group of the European Parliament.
In this edition, you will see speeches by members of the Independent Confederation of Siberia Committee, Andrius Almanis and Stanislav Suslov. Andrius Almanis, born in a remote village in the Altai Republic, officer of the Lithuanian Armed Forces, one of the organizers of the Lithuanian Freedom Party, president of the Institute of Regions of Russia.
I hope it will be a fruitful discussion. Our first panelist is Mr. Andrius Almanis. You have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. I'd like first of all thank organizers of this meeting for inviting me here, and thank you all being here. I am president of Institute of Pos-Russia Regions and a member of Committee of Independent Siberia Confederation. And I will tell you about four options. Switched, okay. Four options of Pos-Russia, but all of them are with same result: independent new states, no other result. First option, the best option. It is the shortest way. With least loss is maximum support from the democratic world for the regions and the new states. In this case, Russia's military defeat will be followed by the guaranteed collapse of the current Kremlin regime, then followed by the guaranteed strengthening of centrifugal forces. The regions or some regions will become independent states. The regions or some regions, in best case scenario, the new states will have sufficient support from the democratic world. After this, stability and democracy will prevail in this region of the world. Option 2. Not sufficient support. Sadly, it's quite a realistic scenario, but hope we will go with first scenario. That's why, because I'm talking about it. The new states will not get sufficient support in this case from the democratic world. Most of new states, if those will appear, will become again authoritarian, and as a result, reanimation of the empire is guaranteed. Then again, concentration of forces will take place, and again, new wars. Then the whole democratic world will mobilize at last, because it will once again face an existential threat. Again, there will be the military defeat of Russia, then again the collapse of the Kremlin regime, and again the guaranteed strengthening of centrifugal forces. Regions, or some regions, again will become independent states, and finally the democratic world will return back to the real power of democracy and decide to give finally sufficient support to the new states. You see, same result.
То есть, видите, результат будет такой же.
In 2 circles or maybe more, with much more victims. Option 3, survival. Oh, back. Option 3, survival of the current Kremlin regime. Also possible. After freezing of the current situation, what is sadly but possible, survival. Then again concentration and forces, and again new wars. And then finally military defeat of Russia. Then again collapse of the Kremlin regime, strengthening of centrifugal forces, and we are going to same result. Establishing of new states, and finally stability and democracy will prevail in this world region. But what price? Option 4, option of united democratic Russia. Democratic, or rather semi or even pseudo-democratic Russia. Perhaps this is even the most dangerous option, because in this case the wish to support the democratic regime of a new united Russia will guaranteed lead back to the renovation of the empire and again to the new wars. Why? It is simple. After the military defeat of Russia, there will be collapse of the Kremlin regime, then will appear a united semi-democratic Russia, and after that, guaranteed fall back to the empire and back to the new wars. You will say, this renovation of empire does not have to happen, but do you remember what was the end of Yeltsin's Russia? Does the world want to repeat same mistakes again and again? So, in order to avoid same circle and guaranteed new wars and a huge number of victims, the democratic world must prepare right now for the guaranteed collapse of the current Russian regime and the establishment of new states. And democratic world must right now support independent democratic organizations and movements in the regions of present-day Russia. After the guaranteed crash of the current Russian regime, 1. Okay. 1. Direct relations with the regions, especially with democratic. 2. Plan for the democratization of regions. 3. Very important. Support only in exchange for democratization. Of course, the reparation plans, constant control over those plans, the imperialization plan, ideas for each region, and investment plans and programs for each region. Thank you for attention.
Stanislav Suslov, born in Novosibirsk, was a radio engineer, businessman, publicist, and author of the novel The Ring of Shabala. After Russia's occupation of Crimea and Donbass, he closed business and left Russia.
Request Mr. Stanislav Suslov first.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, thank you for the chance to speak on important questions. The Russian vote is a concept that has recently taken on alarming importance. The reason is a brutal aggression of the so-called Russian Federation on independent Ukraine. The Russian vote today has a similar ideology to fascism, of one national superiority over others. It was the fascist ideology of the Russian vote that drove the direct military aggression against Ukraine. In the same way, the Russian vote is destroying national differences in the so-called Russian Federation. Moscow ignores the drunkenness, drug use, and aggressive insert the native peoples on the occupation territories. Moscow ignores the terrible HIV epidemic that is killing the population of the so-called Russian Federation. The United Nations classifies this as a genocide. Genocide is being carried out both outside the borders of the so-called Russian Federation and inside it. The Russian vote is irrational and like a parasite, it will die in the end. At present, the only ambition of the Russian vote is to keep alive all the war criminal leader Putin and his friends. The growing agony we are already seeing in the Russian vote will end in disintegration. I would like, therefore, to draw the attention of the European Parliament to two important questions that we have discussed in previous forums, and also an important message which I will say at the end of my speech. The first of the question of security, the security of nuclear weapons, of nuclear objects, and of public safety in the creation of the new independent countries in the post-Russian space. Optionally, they could be done by using elites in power structures in the regions to provide order and security at the start of the formation of independent countries. What guarantees can the elites get for this? The second question is developing a handout of passports from the new independent countries as soon as possible. The question of security. In our previous forums, we have discussed the constancy of the current regional borders. The solution will provide security from regional conflicts on a territorial basis. To secure nuclear objects and weapons, as well as public order, it is proposed to temporarily use existing elites in the initial time. A few words about the elites in the so-called Russian Federation. All the elites in the regions are installed from Moscow. But that doesn't mean that they are ideologically committed to the Russian vote. The rhetoric of their speeches is not an idea but a job for money. Mind you, I'm talking about the elites in the regions. Where they see the frailty of the center, they will look out options to keep their money and security for themselves. They will gladly sell their bosses if they understand that they can keep their money and their lives. One thing to offer even now is to inform the elites that they have the only chance to keep in their money and get an amnesty from the tribunal. But to do so, they want to provide control of the military and police in the regions, and they want to provide security for nuclear objects and weapons, as well as public order. And they want to agree that they will not be able to take part in the future government elections and structures. They must start preparing for the democratic elections in the region and start cooperation with the temporary international control. Temporary international control will work as an advisor to the organization of democratic procedures and nuclear dismantling. Question number 2. There is already a worldwide practice to using passports of some countries to citizens of other countries, dual citizenship and more. The use of such passports could begin after the adoption of a declaration of regional sovereignty. It will be good if the sovereignty of the new countries is the first accepted by the countries that have borders with the so-called Russian Federation. Having a Siberian Confederation of free Tatarstan passport will allow holders of this passport to participate in the referendums and elections. This is very important for the process I'm talking about is the first point. For the first time, passports can be handed out outside the territory of the so-called Russian Federation. I would like to point out that this is not a so-called good Russian passport. I'm only talking about the passport of a citizen of a country that will be liberated from the Moscow-centered occupation. I would like to say that both questions are very important, and it is impossible to talk about all the details in a small period of time. This question needs to be detailed with the analytics experts and the working groups with the European Union and maybe other international bodies. A resolution of this important question will help to protect everyone from the aggressive Russian vote as quickly as possible. When the aggressive Russian vote ends, the following world problems will disappear. First, the global source of military danger. 2, the dirty money cleaning center. 3, a major center of global corruption. 4, center of propaganda against democracy and progress. 5, the problems of Balkans region and resolution of Kosovo questions. 6, dictatorships of Iran and North Korea will disappear. And 7, military conflicts in Africa territory will stop. If we don't stop it now, the aggressive empire will rise again from the dark. Wars that one we see now after the collapse of the USSR. But it is not only the regions of Russia that are occupied by the so-called Russian Federation. My colleague Chedemir Stojkovic will talk about in next panel in our forum today. And dear colleagues, you can find the full text of my speech in promotional materials in our time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.